So the first thing I like to do is go inside the truck and pop the hood. From here you can take your fingers, go in the center of the hood, slide your fingers to the right and catch this handle, push the hood up. Now if you're looking at the truck from the front end, look to the right side of the engine, you'll find the oil fill cap, and I like to take that off before I drain the oil. I just feel like it helps prevent it from creating suction and just allows the oil to drain out of the engine a bit more freely. Alright, so before we continue, a couple things to note upon. First, you don't have to bring the front end up, but if anything, make sure that it's not pointed downhill. If anything, on a flat level surface is fine. It's kind of optional if you want to use ramps. It just helps you get under there and gives you a little bit more access, which is nice, especially because the front ends of these trucks come pretty low. So I do have the truck pointed uphill, and that's important because the drain plug is in the back side of the pan, and that's kind of where all the oil settles. So this will just help get the oil out of the system and give us access. I'm using ramps. I trust these ramps. It's not a bad idea to put jack stands under here too in case these ramps were to fail, but I have trust in these ramps, so I'm taking my own risk there. Also, I do have the rear tire chocked, so God forbid, you know, the parking gear were to fail and the emergency brake were to fail, I have a chock in the back so it won't roll backwards. Alright, with that being said, we can now get under the truck and start draining the oil. Alright, so the camera is pretty much positioned underneath where the passenger would sit in the truck, and we are looking forward. So, you will find, here is the oil filter, and right next to it you will find the oil drain plug. Now, to remove this, you're going to need, what size do I have here? A 15mm socket, fits this nice and snug. You're also going to need a drain pan, obviously something to catch the oil because we want to dispose of this properly and not just dump it on the ground. So we can crack this, and it's a good idea to wear gloves as well. Also, while I'm spinning this off, you're going to want an oil filter wrench to remove this oil filter, but first things first, we got to drain this oil. We can come back in and start removing the oil filter. Whoever put this oil filter on here last is actually pretty intelligent and only put it on maybe hand tight and then gave it a little bit of a turn with the wrench. I've seen a lot of oil filters. Real quick, you're going to want to spin this off a little bit and let it drip out first, but I've seen a lot of guys put on oil filters, they'll crank them on hand tight and then they'll just keep cranking them and cranking them and cranking them with their oil filter wrenches, almost to the point where they start to torque and rip and tear. There's no need for these filters to go on that tight. Hand tight, just as tight as you can with your hand, and if you want to give it like a little eighth of a turn with a filter wrench, that's fine, but don't crank these on here that tight. No need for it. So now we'll just let this oil filter drip dry, and I'm going to grab a shop towel in the meantime, and we'll let this drain. Alright, so we got the majority of the oil out of here. This is where it's going to get a little bit messy. I can't find my shop towels. I guess they're still packed away in some box somewhere. So I have an old t-shirt that I'm just going to utilize. I'm just going to want to spin this filter off the rest of the way by hand. Be ready to catch it. And yeah, just make sure you catch it. Then bring it down some, and then we'll tilt it into the drain pan here. So if you let go, you don't catch it, it's just going to splatter and make a big mess, which you don't want. Alright, just about ready to come off. There it is, going to keep it upright. And now I'm going to just pour it right in the drain pan. That's probably the easiest and cleanest way to do this. Leave it upside down and we'll let it drain out some more. Alright, so this is pretty much completely empty now. So I have my new filter, and what you want to do, little O-ring on here. I'm sure you guys have seen this a million times. But you want to put a little bit of oil, clean oil. It's probably a little bit better than dirty oil, but I have clean oil right here and I don't feel like walking all the way up there, so just simply, it's a good idea to spin this to the left before you spin it to the right, and righty tighty, just spin this puppy on here all the way. Alright, so I got that filter on there pretty tight right now by hand, but I'm just going to take a wrench and I'm going to give it, you know, like an eighth of a turn, just a little extra crank to make sure it's seated on there, which honestly, the way I had it on there by hand was probably just fine, but it's just a little bit of insurance. Like I said earlier, you really don't want to really crank on it, just make it snug, you know? Alright, now you want to locate your drain bolt and just clean this off a little bit with a rag or shop towel. Make sure there's no shavings on it. I'm not sure if mine has a magnet, but I'm not seeing any shavings, which is a good thing. You want to make sure that this, I guess you could call this like a rubber washer, just make sure that's in good condition, because that's really what seals up this hole. So, we'll put it back in the drain pan, start it by hand. We'll crank it down by hand as far as it'll go. I would not recommend using any type of impact on this. This is all handwork here. And take your 15mm socket wrench. And you don't want to go too crazy. I'm sure there's a proper torque spec for this, but just, you know, snug. It's nice and snug. Gonna wipe up any residual oil. Just so if I see a drip in my parking spot later on, I know that it might be a legitimate drip and not just, you know, residual oil from the change. So without starting the truck, I'm going to see if I can roll it backwards off these ramps, so when I fill the oil, it's kind of important that you have the truck on a level surface. So let's see if I can do this without starting it. Alright, you want to find yourself a good funnel about this size is perfect, and before you start pouring oil into your engine, just take a cloth and make sure that this funnel is clean, because you don't want to put impurities back in your oil system. Just change the oil. This looks nice and clean. Let's get pouring. The other filter is actually not ideal for these Chevys. The much more ideal filter is one like this, which this is a long, narrow filter. I don't know if you call that a transmission filter, but you can rest it right on your brake fluid reservoir and it sits in there nice and snug, and from here you can just take your fluid and carefully start pouring this in here. And because this truck takes 8 quarts and each jug has 5 quarts, the first jug we can just pour in there completely and not worry about. The second one we gotta measure. With pretty much all jugs of oil, if you look on the side handle, you'll see kind of a clear section that'll indicate how many quarts or liters you have remaining in your jug. As mentioned earlier, these come with 5 quarts. So what I'm going to do now is from this full jug, I'm going to transfer exactly 3 quarts of oil into my empty jug, and that's why I put the funnel in there. So that way I can just empty that jug completely into the engine compartment. I know I put exactly 8 quarts in there. And that'll just save time as opposed to fumbling around and trying to, you know, get to this exact mark while pouring it into the engine. So now we can take our jug that's precisely measured to 3 quarts, we'll dump it in the engine, and that'll pretty much complete this oil change. Now before you click away from this video, there is one important thing I'm forgetting here. After we finish filling up this engine with oil, and we're going to check it with the dipstick just to be sure we're at the right mark, we need to go inside the cab and manually reset the oil life indicator, and that'll tell us when the next recommended oil change is, or about anywhere between 7,000 to 8,000 miles. This is synthetic oil though, this is good stuff. We'll get a lot of miles out of this. So now we're going to reset the engine oil life indicator in our truck, which this is pretty much universal for all modern cars and trucks in one fashion or another. So hood is open, we're going to dismiss that. Change engine oil soon, we're going to dismiss that. Ice possible. Okay, so what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to info, specifically in the Chevy, and we're going to scroll through the screens until we find oil life, which it was on all along. I just wanted to scroll through and show you that you can scroll through the menus here. So once we get to oil life, we're going to toggle to the right, and then it says reset. Simply select that. And that's that. Now we have 100% oil life remaining. It's also a good idea to take note of the mileage at when you change your oil and just mark that down somewhere as well. Don't 100% go by this. This is just a recommendation, and because we're putting synthetic oil, honestly, we probably could get more than, 7,000 to 8,000 miles out of it, but it's still a good habit to change your oil, every 7,000 to 8,000 miles, depending on where you live, how you're driving your car or truck. There's a lot of variables, but a good rule of thumb, every 7,000 to 8,000 miles.